Captain Daniel Harper stared out the viewing window of the USS Vengeance. Stars stretched endlessly in every direction, small points of light against the darkness of space. He had been in command of humanity's most powerful warship for 2 years now, but the view never got old. Today, however, the beauty of space could not calm the worry in his mind. The Ascendi Empire had ruled the galaxy for 300 years. They controlled 40 different alien species across 12 star systems. Every species that encountered them had one choice to make: kneel before the Ascendi and accept them as gods, or face complete destruction. No one had ever chosen to fight. No one had survived refusing them. Commander Lisa Bennett walked onto the bridge carrying a data tablet. Her face showed the stress they all felt. She stopped beside Daniel and handed him the device without saying a word. He looked down at the screen and felt his stomach tighten. The message was clear and direct. The Ascendi had found Earth. Daniel read through the intelligence report carefully. An Ascendi scout ship had detected human radio signals 3 months ago. Since then, they had been watching and studying humanity. They knew where Earth was located. They knew how many ships humans had built. They knew everything they needed to know to launch an invasion. The report ended with a timeline. The Ascendi subjugation fleet would arrive at Earth in 40 days. Lisa spoke quietly. They are sending 300 ships. Our entire fleet has only 20 vessels capable of deep space combat. The Vengeance is the only one with advanced weapon systems. Daniel nodded slowly. He had known this day might come. Humanity had only developed faster than light travel 15 years ago. They were still new to the galactic community. They were still learning that space was not empty and peaceful. It was full of dangers, and the Ascendi Empire was the greatest danger of all. What do we know about their capabilities? Daniel asked. Lisa pulled up another file on the tablet. Their ships are incredibly advanced. They use some kind of energy shielding that makes them almost impossible to damage. Their weapons can destroy a planet's surface in hours. Every species that has fought them has lost quickly and completely. Daniel studied the images of Ascendi vessels. They were beautiful in a terrible way. Each ship looked like it had been carved from golden light. They glowed with an inner radiance that made them appear holy and divine. The Ascendi wanted everyone to see them as gods, and they had designed everything to reinforce that image. Far across the galaxy, on a planet called Virelia Prime, Dr. Kevin Ross sat in a small prison cell. He had been captured 3 months earlier while conducting research at a neutral science station. The Ascendi had taken him and dozens of other scientists from various species. They wanted to study how different races thought and learned. Kevin was the only human in the facility. At first, Kevin had been terrified. The Ascendi guards stood over 2 meters tall, with skin that seemed to shimmer with golden light. They spoke in voices that echoed with strange harmonics, making every word sound like a pronouncement from heaven. They never showed emotion, never showed weakness. They acted exactly like the gods they claimed to be. But Kevin was a scientist. He observed everything. He asked questions. He studied his captors carefully. And slowly, over weeks of captivity, he began to notice things that did not make sense. The Ascendi bled red blood when injured. They ate food and drank water like any biological creature. They grew tired and needed to rest. They were not gods. They were just another alien species. One day, Kevin was moved to a new section of the prison. This area was used for technology testing. The Ascendi wanted to see how different species interacted with their advanced systems. Kevin was given access to a computer terminal and told to solve various technical puzzles. The guards watched but did not interfere. Kevin worked on the puzzles, but his real attention was on the computer system itself. He was a skilled programmer and engineer. As he solved each test, he explored deeper into the network. The Ascendi security was good, but it was designed to keep out simple attacks. Kevin used complex techniques that took advantage of small flaws in their code. After 2 weeks of careful work, Kevin broke through into the Ascendi database. What he found changed everything. The files contained the complete history of the Ascendi race. They had not always been powerful. Thousands of years ago, they had been a normal species struggling to survive on their homeworld. Then they discovered ancient ruins left by an even older civilization. Inside those ruins were incredible technologies. The Ascendi learned to use these technologies. They learned to manipulate energy in ways that seemed magical. They could create shields that stopped any weapon. They could generate power without any visible source. They could do things that appeared impossible. But it was not magic and they were not gods. They had simply found tools left behind by someone else. The files also contained technical specifications for all Ascendi equipment. Kevin studied the shield technology carefully. The shields worked by creating a specific energy frequency that deflected attacks. But every frequency had a corresponding counter-frequency. If someone could match that counter-frequency precisely, the shields would collapse. Kevin knew he had to get this information back to Earth. The Ascendi were planning to subjugate humanity in 40 days. If humans went into that confrontation believing the Ascendi were truly divine and invincible, they would lose before the fight even started. But if they knew the truth, if they understood that the Ascendi were just advanced aliens using old technology, humanity might have a chance. He spent 3 days carefully copying all the data he could access. He compressed it into a single transmission package. Then he waited for the right moment. The prison facility had a communication array that sent regular reports back to Ascendi Command. If Kevin could hijack that system for just a few seconds, he could send his data to Earth. The opportunity came during a shift change. For exactly 90 seconds, only 2 guards were monitoring the communication room. Kevin had programmed a virus that would distract the security system during that time. He activated it and immediately sent his transmission toward Earth at maximum speed. Alarms blared through the facility within seconds. The guards rushed to Kevin's cell and dragged him out roughly. He did not resist. He had done what he needed to do. The message was away, traveling through space at faster than light speeds. It would reach Earth in 30 days. That would give humanity 10 days to prepare before the Ascendi fleet arrived. Back on the USS Vengeance, Daniel Harper called a meeting with his senior officers. Admiral Helen Price joined them via holographic communication from Earth. She was the commander of all human military forces and would make the final decision about how humanity would respond to the Ascendi. Ultimatum: Daniel presented everything they knew. The Ascendi were coming. They expected humanity to surrender immediately. If humans refused, the Ascendi would attack and destroy every human settlement in space. Earth itself would be invaded and occupied. Humanity would become slaves to the Empire, forced to worship beings who claimed to be gods. Admiral Price listened to the report in silence. When Daniel finished, she sat back in her chair and closed her eyes for a long moment. Everyone waited. The decision she made in the next few minutes would determine the future of the entire human race. Finally, the Admiral opened her eyes. Her voice was firm and clear. "We will not kneel. We will not surrender." Humanity did not crawl out of caves and cross oceans and reach for the stars just to bow down to false gods. If the Ascendi want Earth, they will have to take it from us. High Chancellor Zurakan stood in the grand temple on the planet Celestian. The building rose kilometers into the sky, covered in gold and precious stones that caught the light of 3 suns. Every surface was carved with images showing the glory of the Ascendi Empire. Every hall echoed with the songs of worship sung by conquered species. This was the center of everything, the heart of divine power that ruled 12 star systems. A messenger approached and bowed so low that his face touched the floor. Zurakan did not acknowledge him immediately. It was important to maintain proper ceremony. The messenger waited, not moving, barely breathing. After exactly 1 minute, Zurakan spoke. "Rise and deliver your message." The messenger stood but kept his eyes downward. "Great Chancellor, the humans have refused our offer. They will not submit. They will not accept the divine truth of the Ascendi." Zurakan felt anger flash through him, hot and bright. In 300 years, no species had ever refused the initial offer. Some had tried to fight after surrendering, but none had said no to that first choice. The audacity of these humans was beyond understanding. They were barely capable of space travel. Their technology was primitive. Their worlds were few. How could they possibly think they could resist? "Prepare the subjugation fleet," Zurakan commanded. "Make it large enough that they will see the futility of resistance. 300 ships. We will demonstrate to the galaxy what happens to those who deny the divine order." The messenger bowed again and hurried away to deliver the commands. Zurakan turned to look out the massive window that dominated one wall of the chamber. He could see the capital city spreading below. Millions of beings living in the shadow of Ascendi greatness. They all believed. They all worshipped. They all knew their place in the cosmic order. The humans would learn as well. On the USS Vengeance, Lieutenant Jake Morrison worked in the weapons laboratory deep in the ship's lower sections. He was surrounded by tools, computer screens, and pieces of experimental equipment. Jake was the best weapons engineer in the human fleet, and right now he had the most important job anyone had ever given him. The data from Dr. Kevin Ross had arrived 3 days ago. Jake had barely slept since then. He had read through every file, studied every technical specification, and analyzed every piece of information about Ascendi shield technology. The data was incredible. It gave humanity exactly what they needed to fight back. But turning that information into working weapons was not easy. The Ascendi shields operated on a complex energy frequency. Jake had to modify the plasma cannons on the Vengeance to match the exact counter frequency that would collapse those shields. The problem was precision. If he was off by even a tiny amount, the weapons would be useless. The shields would hold and humanity would die. Jake ran another simulation on his computer. The numbers scrolled across the screen too fast for normal reading. But he had been looking at similar data for days. He could spot the patterns now. This simulation looked better. The frequency match was within acceptable parameters. He saved the settings and moved to the next cannon. The Vengeance had 8 main plasma cannons. Each one needed to be calibrated individually. The work was slow and demanding. Jake's hands shook from exhaustion and too much coffee, but he kept going. Every hour he spent here was one less hour humanity had to prepare. The Ascendi fleet would arrive in 7 days. Colonel Amy Stevens stood in the training bay watching her soldiers practice boarding techniques. She had handpicked 60 fighters from various military branches across Earth. They were the best of the best. Soldiers who excelled in close combat and quick thinking. They would be the first humans to ever set foot on an Ascendi ship, and they needed to be ready for anything. The simulation ended, and the holographic enemies disappeared. Amy walked out onto the training floor. The soldiers immediately stopped and stood at attention. She looked at each face, seeing the determination and fear mixed together. They all knew what they were facing. They all knew the odds were against them. The Ascendi fight like they are performing a religious ceremony, Amy said. Every move is practiced and precise. They expect their enemies to be afraid, to be frozen by the sight of their golden armor and glowing weapons. They have fought this way for 300 years because it has always worked. She paused and walked slowly between the ranks of soldiers. But we are not like the species they have conquered before. We do not believe they are gods. We know they bleed and die like anyone else. When we board their ships, we will not fight with ceremony. We will fight to win. We will be fast, brutal, and efficient. We will hit them where they are weakest and give them no time to adapt. The soldiers remained silent, absorbing her words. Amy continued. Run the simulation again. This time move twice as fast. Do not wait for openings. Create them. Back on Virelia Prime, Kevin Ross sat in an interrogation room. 2 Ascendi guards stood on either side of him, their faces showing no emotion. Across the table sat an Ascendi officer, whose name Kevin had not been told. The officer had been asking questions for 2 hours, trying to understand how Kevin had accessed the secure database and sent information to Earth. Kevin said nothing. He had decided during his first minute in this room that cooperation was pointless. The Ascendi would either kill him or keep him prisoner. Talking would not change that outcome. So he sat in silence, looking at the wall behind the officer, waiting for this to end. The officer stood up abruptly. You have interfered with divine will. You have stolen sacred knowledge and given it to lesser beings. The punishment for this is death. But first you will watch as your species is conquered and enslaved. You will see the futility of your actions. Kevin finally spoke. You are not gods. Your shields will fail. Your ships will burn, and my people will be free. The officer struck Kevin across the face, a quick backhand that sent him sprawling from his chair. The guards pulled him back up roughly. Blood ran from Kevin's split lip, but he was smiling. The officer had shown emotion, anger, fear. Gods did not feel fear. On Earth, Admiral Helen Price stood in the command center buried deep below the military headquarters. Dozens of screens showed information from across human space. Ship positions, weapon readouts, supply lines, communication networks. Everything humanity had built was displayed here, and it all seemed so small compared to what they were facing. An aide approached with another data pad. Helen took it and read the latest intelligence report. The Ascendi fleet had been spotted leaving their staging area. They were moving toward human space at high speed. Arrival was now estimated at 6 days instead of 7. The enemy was eager to begin the conquest. Helen pulled up a tactical display showing the planned battle positions. The USS Vengeance would lead a force of 20 ships to intercept the Ascendi fleet at Threshold Station, a neutral trading post at the edge of human territory. It was the perfect location for humanity's stand. The station had been evacuated 3 days ago, so civilian casualties would not be a concern. And the open space around the station would give human ships room to maneuver. The plan was desperate, but it was all they had. The Vengeance would use its modified weapons to try to break through Ascendi shields. If that worked, the other ships would focus fire on the vulnerable targets. Meanwhile, boarding teams would attempt to capture disabled Ascendi vessels and turn them against the Empire. It was a plan that relied on surprise, speed, and the hope that Kevin Ross's data was accurate. Helen authorized the final deployment orders. Every available ship would move to Threshold Station immediately. Civilian transports were being armed with whatever weapons could be mounted quickly. Even old military vessels that had been scheduled for retirement were being pulled back into service. Humanity would throw everything it had into this fight, because there would be no second chances. On the Vengeance, Daniel Harper received the deployment orders and called his crew to battle stations. The ship came alive with activity. Engineers checked every system. Weapons crews loaded ammunition and ran final tests. Medical teams prepared for casualties. Everyone knew their job and everyone understood what failure would mean. Lisa Bennett joined Daniel on the bridge. She carried 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him. They stood together looking at the main view screen as the ship began moving toward its destination. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Finally, Lisa broke the silence. "Do you think we can actually win?" Daniel took a sip of coffee before answering. "I think we can hurt them. I think we can show them that humans are not easy prey. Whether that is enough to win, I do not know. But it is better than surrendering without a fight." Lisa nodded. "Jake says the weapons will work. He has run the calculations 1,000 times. If Ross's data is good, we can punch through their shields. And if the data is wrong?" Daniel asked. "Then we die quickly instead of slowly," Lisa said. There was no emotion in her voice. She had accepted the possibility of death when she joined the military. They all had. The Vengeance jumped to faster than light speed and the stars stretched into lines of light around them. Behind them, 19 other ships followed. Ahead of them, 300 Ascendi vessels waited. In 6 days, humanity would face its greatest test. They would stand against beings who claimed to be gods. They would fight for the right to remain free. News of the battle spread across the Ascendi Empire faster than anyone expected. On 40 different worlds, billions of beings learned that the humans had done the impossible. They had fought the Divine Fleet and survived. More than survived. They had won. On Virelia Prime, the slave workers gathered in small groups during their rest periods. They whispered to each other in languages the Ascendi guards did not understand. The humans had destroyed 40 ships. The shields had failed. The gods could bleed. The words passed from person to person, gaining strength with each telling. Dr. Kevin Ross heard the news from another prisoner, an alien scientist from a species called the Trell. The Trell had been slaves for 200 years, so long that most of them had forgotten what freedom felt like. But now the Trell scientist was smiling, actually smiling for the first time Kevin had ever seen. "Your people fought well," the Trell said quietly. "They have given hope to those who had none." Kevin felt pride swell in his chest, but also fear. He knew what would happen next. The Ascendi would not accept defeat. They would gather more ships, more weapons, more warriors. They would come at humanity with everything they had, determined to crush this rebellion before it could spread. The battle at Threshold Station was just the beginning. In the Grand Temple on Celestion, High Chancellor Zura Khan stood before the Divine Council. The 11 other members of the council sat in their ceremonial chairs, their faces showing emotions they rarely displayed. Shock, confusion, anger, fear. The impossible had happened on their watch. 40 ships, Council Member Dravon said. Her voice shook slightly. "We lost 40 ships to 20 primitive vessels. How is this possible?" Zura Khan had been asking himself the same question for hours. He had reviewed the battle recordings a dozen times. The human weapons should not have penetrated the shields. The shield technology had been perfected thousands of years ago, using knowledge from the ancient ruins. It had never failed before, The humans had specific knowledge of our shield frequencies, Zurakan said. They modified their weapons to generate counter-frequencies. This was not luck or accident. They had help from someone with access to our technical databases. The council members looked at each other. They all understood what this meant. There was a leak somewhere in their perfect empire. Someone had betrayed divine secrets to the enemy. The hunt for that traitor would be merciless. What is our response? Another council member asked. The subject species are already showing signs of unrest. If we appear weak, the entire empire could fracture. Zurakan had been planning his response since the moment he received news of the battle. The empire had survived for 3 centuries through a combination of overwhelming force and perceived invincibility. The humans had damaged that perception. The only way to restore it was through a demonstration of power so absolute that no one would dare question Ascendi authority again. We will gather a fleet of 1,000 ships, Zurakan announced. We will hunt down every human vessel in space. We will burn their colonies to ash. We will invade their homeworld and enslave every member of their species. And we will broadcast every moment of their defeat to every corner of the empire. When we are finished, no one will remember that the humans ever won a single battle. The council members nodded their agreement. This was the only way forward. The humans had to be destroyed completely, and the destruction had to be public and terrible. The Empire would write the final chapter of human history as a warning to all other species. On Earth, Admiral Helen Price received reports from across human space. The victory at Threshold Station had come at a terrible cost. 8 ships destroyed, over 2,000 personnel dead. The surviving vessels were all damaged to various degrees. The USS Vengeance needed at least 3 weeks of repairs before it could fight again at full capacity. But the reports also contained incredible news. The 3 captured Ascendi ships were being studied by human scientists. The technology was more advanced than anything humanity had, but it was not magical. It could be understood. It could be copied. If given enough time, humans could build their own versions of Ascendi shields and weapons. Time was the problem. Intelligence reports suggested the Ascendi were gathering a massive fleet for a counterattack. Within 2 months, possibly sooner, they would come in such numbers that no amount of clever tactics could save humanity. Earth needed allies, and it needed them quickly. Admiral Price opened a communication channel to the Vengeance. Daniel Harper's face appeared on the screen. He looked exhausted but determined. In the background, Lisa Bennett was coordinating repair teams. Captain Harper, new orders, Price said. You are to take the Vengeance and travel to the core systems of the Ascendi Empire. Find the species that are enslaved there. Show them what you did at Threshold Station. Convince them to rise up against their masters. We need to create chaos inside the Empire itself. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing the orders. What the Admiral was asking was incredibly dangerous. The Vengeance would be alone deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hostile forces trying to start rebellions among species that had been conquered centuries ago. The chance of success was slim. The chance of survival was even slimmer. Understood, Admiral, Daniel said finally. When do we leave? As soon as repairs are complete. You will have access to all the data we extracted from the captured ships. Use it however you need to. And Captain, come back alive. Humanity needs heroes right now. The communication ended and Daniel turned to Lisa. She had been listening to the entire conversation. Her expression showed what they were both thinking. This mission was nearly impossible, but refusing was not an option. The Ascendi were coming with overwhelming force. The only way to survive was to strike at them from within, to shatter their empire before they could use its full strength against Earth. On Virelia Prime, the whispers were growing louder. The slave workers on the planet numbered over 3 million, drawn from a dozen different species. They worked in factories and mines, producing materials and equipment for the Ascendi war machine. For centuries they had accepted their fate, believing resistance was impossible. Now something had changed. Kevin Ross was moved from his cell to a work detail in a manufacturing complex. The guards watched less carefully than before. They seemed distracted, worried. Kevin worked alongside other prisoners, operating machines that produced component parts for Ascendi ships. As he worked, he talked quietly to the others. The humans proved the Ascendi can be beaten, Kevin said. Their shields can fail. Their ships can burn. They are not gods. They are just another species that got lucky with old technology. A worker from a species called the Vorn shook his head. Even if that is true, what can we do? We have no weapons, no ships. The Ascendi have armies and fleets. Slaves cannot fight empires, Kevin smiled. We do not need weapons to hurt them. We work in their factories. We maintain their equipment. We build their machines. What if we just stopped? What if all the slaves across all the world simply refused to work? The Ascendi depend on us more than they want to admit. The idea spread through the work detail like fire through dry grass. By the end of the shift, hundreds of workers had heard it. By the next day, thousands knew. The slaves began to organize in secret, passing messages through the vast networks they had built over centuries of captivity. They set a date for the uprising. They would strike when they could do the most damage to the HFY war effort. The USS Vengeance completed repairs and jumped to faster-than-light speed, heading toward the core systems of the Ascendi Empire. The ship traveled alone through space, a single human vessel penetrating deep into enemy territory. Everyone aboard knew they might not return from this mission. Jake Morrison spent his time modifying more weapons and teaching other crew members how to adjust the frequency counters. If they had to fight, they needed every advantage they could get. Colonel Amy Stevens drilled her boarding teams constantly, preparing them for operations on enemy worlds. Every person on the ship had a job, and every job was critical. Daniel Harper stood on the bridge and studied star charts of the Empire. There were dozens of slave worlds, each one producing different resources. The key was finding the right target. Not the most heavily defended world, but one where a rebellion would cause maximum disruption to Ascendi operations. There, Lisa said, pointing to a system called Vega 9. 3 slave worlds in close proximity, major manufacturing centers. If we could start uprisings on all 3 at once, it would cripple Ascendi production for months. Daniel nodded. Set course for Vega 9 and start preparing messages we can broadcast to the populations. We need to convince them that freedom is possible. The Vengeance altered course, heading deeper into the Empire. Behind them, the Ascendi were gathering their 1,000-ship fleet. Ahead of them, millions of slaves waited for a sign that their centuries of suffering could end. The war was expanding beyond simple combat between fleets. It was becoming something much larger. A war of liberation that would determine the future of the entire galaxy. On Celestian, Zura Khan received daily reports of unrest across the Empire. Minor rebellions on 3 worlds, sabotage in 2 major factories, increased security incidents on a dozen slave planets. The humans had done more than destroy 40 ships. The Ascendi war fleet gathered at the edge of human space like a golden storm. 300 vessels hung in formation, each one gleaming with light that seemed to come from within. They were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, forming shapes that looked like religious symbols when viewed from a distance. Everything about the fleet was designed to inspire awe and terror. High Priest Calvaris commanded the fleet from the bridge of the largest ship. He was old even by Ascendi standards, having lived for nearly 400 years. He had overseen the conquest of 6 different species during his long life. Each time had been the same. The lesser beings saw the fleet, understood their own insignificance, and surrendered. This would be no different. A communication officer approached and bowed. Great Priest, we have entered the border of human territory. The station called Threshold is ahead. Our sensors detect 20 human vessels in defensive positions. Calvaris nodded slowly. 20 ships against 300. The humans had come to fight, but they had brought an insultingly small force. Perhaps they thought this token resistance would earn them better terms of surrender. Perhaps they simply did not understand mathematics. Either way, this would end quickly. Open all communication channels, Calvaris ordered. I will speak to them. The communication systems activated, broadcasting on every frequency that human technology could receive. Calvaris stood before the recording devices, his robes flowing around him, his face serene and terrible. When he spoke, his voice carried the harmonic resonance that the Ascendi used to make themselves seem supernatural. Humans of Earth, you stand before the Ascendi Empire. We are the inheritors of divine power, the ordained rulers of all spacefaring peoples. You have been offered the blessing of joining our eternal order. You have foolishly refused. This is your final opportunity. Submit now, accept our divine authority, and your people will be spared. Continue this pointless resistance, and you will be cleansed from the stars. The message ended, and Calvaris waited for the response. He expected immediate surrender or perhaps desperate pleas for mercy. What he got instead was a single word transmitted from the lead human ship. No. On the bridge of the USS Vengeance, Daniel Harper stood calmly at his command station. Around him, his crew worked with focused intensity. Lisa Bennett coordinated defensive positions. Jake Morrison monitored the modified weapons systems. Every person on the bridge knew that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity survived as a free species. "The Ascendi fleet is moving," Lisa reported. "They are breaking into attack formations. 3 groups of 100 ships each. They plan to surround us." Daniel studied the tactical display. The Ascendi were moving with the slow confidence of beings who had never experienced real defeat. Their formations were beautiful and precise, but they were also predictable. The Empire had become too used to easy victories. They fought with ceremony instead of adaptation. "All ships scatter formation Delta," Daniel ordered. "Make them chase us. Keep them spread out." The human fleet broke apart, each ship moving in a different direction at maximum speed. The Ascendi formations wavered, confused by prey that ran in unexpected directions. They had to split their forces further to pursue, and the perfect geometric patterns dissolved into a loose pursuit. "Enemy weapons charging," Jake reported. "They are preparing to fire." "Wait for it," Daniel said quietly. The first Ascendi volley lit up space with golden energy beams. Each shot was accompanied by a booming voice declaring judgment and righteousness. The beams tracked toward human ships with impossible accuracy, bending through space to follow their targets. This was the power that had broken every species that ever resisted. But the human ships were small and fast. They dodged and weaved, using momentum and quick burns to stay ahead of the energy beams. 2 ships were hit and their shields overloaded, knocking them out of the fight immediately. But 18 ships survived and kept moving, leading the Ascendi deeper into disorder. "Now," Daniel commanded, "all ships execute attack pattern Omega." The surviving human vessels suddenly reversed course, burning their engines at dangerous levels to change direction. They dove toward the Ascendi fleet from multiple angles, moving too fast for the enemy to track effectively. The Vengeance led the charge, heading straight for the Ascendi flagship. "Weapons range in 10 seconds, Jake announced. His hands moved across the control panel, making final adjustments to the modified plasma cannons. Everything depended on the calculations being correct. If Kevin Ross had been wrong about the shield frequencies, if Jake had made even one mistake in the modifications, the weapons would fail. "Fire," Daniel ordered. The Vengeance's 8 plasma cannons fired simultaneously. 8 streams of superheated energy lanced through space, converging on the Ascendi flagship. The golden shields flared bright, the same shields that had never failed in 300 years of conquest. Then something impossible happened. The shields flickered and collapsed. The plasma round struck the flagship's hull directly. Metal vaporized under the intense heat. Secondary explosions rippled across the surface as power conduits overloaded. The flagship's main reactor went critical, and the entire ship erupted in a massive explosion that lit up space like a newborn star. For exactly 3 seconds, the Ascendi fleet froze. No one moved. No one fired. They simply stared at the expanding debris field where their flagship had been. The divine shields had failed. The impossible had happened. Their high priest was dead. Jake Morrison let out a shout of triumph. "It worked. The frequency match was perfect. We can hurt them." Daniel did not celebrate. He was already calling out orders. "All ships concentrate fire on their command vessels. Hit them while they are confused." The human fleet obeyed, targeting the larger Ascendi ships that carried the fleet commanders. Modified weapons fired again and again. Shields collapsed. Ships exploded. In the span of 2 minutes, humanity destroyed 15 Ascendi capital ships. It was more damage than the Empire had suffered in the last century combined. The Ascendi fleet began to recover from the shock. Orders came from the surviving commanders. The ships tried to reform their ceremonial patterns, but panic was spreading through their ranks. Across 300 vessels, crew members whispered in disbelief. How could divine protection fail? What did this mean for the foundations of their faith? A group of 30 Ascendi ships broke formation and charged directly at the Vengeance. They had abandoned their careful attack patterns in favor of raw aggression. They fired everything they had, filling space with energy beams and missile salvos. Their shields were still active, still powerful, but the humans knew how to bypass them now. "Evasive maneuvers," Daniel commanded. The Vengeance rolled and dove, dodging most of the incoming fire. 2 missiles got through and slammed into the human ship's shields, causing alarms to blare across the bridge. "Shields at 40%, Lisa reported. "We cannot take many more hits like that." Target the lead ships, Daniel ordered. Fire at will. The modified cannons blazed again. 3 Ascendi vessels lost their shields and died in rapid succession, but the remaining ships kept coming, their desire for revenge overcoming their shock and confusion. The humans had drawn blood, and now the Empire wanted to return the favor with overwhelming force. On the other side of the battle, Colonel Amy Stevens prepared her boarding teams. 3 Ascendi ships had been disabled by the initial attack, their engines destroyed but their hulls mostly intact. These were the targets. If the boarding operation succeeded, humanity would capture Ascendi technology and possibly prisoners who could provide more intelligence. Remember your training, Amy said over the tactical communication channel. Move fast, hit hard, do not give them time to organize a defense. These are not gods. They are just soldiers who have never fought a real battle. The boarding shuttles launched from the human vessels, small craft that accelerated toward the disabled Ascendi ships. Point defense systems on the enemy vessels tried to shoot them down, but most of the automated systems had been damaged in the fighting. 12 shuttles made it through and clamped onto Ascendi hulls. Cutting torches burned through the golden metal. Hatches blew open. Human soldiers poured into Ascendi corridors, weapons ready. The interior of the enemy ships was designed like temples, with high ceilings and decorative pillars. Everything was gold and white, beautiful and completely impractical for actual combat. Ascendi warriors met the human boarders in the first corridor. They wore ceremonial armor that glowed with soft light. They carried energy weapons that hummed with power. They moved with the practiced grace of warriors who had trained for centuries. But they had never trained for an enemy like this. The humans attacked with brutal efficiency. They used grenades to break Ascendi formations. They targeted joints in the ceremonial armor where protection was weakest. They moved in small teams that covered each other, and never stayed in one position long enough to be targeted effectively. Within minutes, the Ascendi warriors were falling back in confusion. Amy led her team deeper into one of the disabled ships. They fought through 3 more groups of defenders, each battle shorter than the last. The Ascendi were not cowards, but they had no experience with this kind of warfare. They expected formal duels and honorable combat. The USS Vengeance entered the Vega 9 system with all stealth systems active. The ship moved slowly through the outer asteroid field, using the rocks as cover. 3 planets orbited the central star, each one covered with factories and mining operations. Millions of slaves from dozens of species worked on those worlds, producing materials for the Ascendi war machine. Daniel Harper studied the sensor readings carefully. The system had a moderate defense force. 30 Ascendi ships patrolled the space between the planets, and orbital defense platforms surrounded each world. A direct assault would be suicide. But that was not the plan. Lisa, are the communications ready? Daniel asked. Commander Lisa Bennett nodded. We have access to all slave communication frequencies. The messages are prepared in 40 different languages. When you give the order, every slave in this system will hear our broadcast. Daniel took a deep breath. This was it. Everything they had done, everything they had risked, came down to this moment. If the slaves rose up, it would create chaos throughout the Empire. If they stayed passive, humanity would face the Ascendi fleet alone and likely die. Send the broadcast, Daniel ordered. The transmission went out on every frequency, bypassing Ascendi security, through techniques learned from the captured ships. On 3 worlds, in factories and mines and processing centers, millions of slaves heard the same message. A human voice speaking words that many had thought they would never hear. People of the Ascendi Empire, you have been told that your masters are gods. You have been told that resistance is impossible. You have been told to accept your chains and be grateful for the mercy of your owners. These are lies. The Ascendi are not gods. They are just another species. No better than you, no stronger than you. They maintain their power through fear and deception. But that power can be broken. We are humans from Earth. 6 days ago, we fought the Ascendi fleet. We destroyed 40 of their ships. We collapsed their shields. We proved they can be defeated. Now we are here to offer you a choice. You can remain slaves or you can fight for your freedom. The choice is yours, but know this. You are not alone. Stand with us and together we will tear down this empire. The message repeated 3 times, then ended. On the Vengeance's bridge, everyone waited in silence. For 60 seconds, nothing happened. Then the sensors started detecting activity on the planet's surfaces. Work in the factories stopped. Slaves were gathering in groups. Ascendi guards were responding with force. On the largest planet in a manufacturing complex that produced ship components, the slaves made their move. 3 million workers stopped what they were doing at the exact same moment. They filled the factory floors, the corridors, the loading bays. When Ascendi guards tried to force them back to work, the slaves fought back with tools and bare hands. Kevin Ross was in that complex. He had known the broadcast was coming, because one of the other prisoners was a communications technician who had received a coded warning. Kevin was ready. When the human message ended, he grabbed a heavy metal wrench and charged the nearest Ascendi guard. The guard was surprised. Slaves did not attack. Slaves obeyed or they died. The hesitation cost him his life. Kevin's wrench crashed into the guard's helmet, denting the golden metal and dropping him to the floor. Other slaves saw it happen and suddenly they understood. The Ascendi could fall. The gods could be hurt. The uprising spread through the complex like a wave. Slaves overwhelmed guards through sheer numbers. They took weapons from the fallen Ascendi and used them to assault security stations. Within an hour, the entire complex was in slave hands. The workers had transformed from property into an army. Similar rebellions erupted across all 3 planets. Not every complex succeeded. Some were crushed by quick Ascendi responses, but enough succeeded that the entire system descended into chaos. The Ascendi defense fleet tried to respond, sending ships to bombard rebel positions from orbit. That was when the vengeance revealed itself. "All weapons, fire," Daniel commanded. The vengeance emerged from the asteroid field with guns blazing. Its modified plasma cannons targeted the orbital defense platforms first, destroying them before they could react. Then the ship turned its attention to the patrol fleet. The Ascendi ships tried to form defensive positions, but they were confused and disorganized. Their attention had been on the planets, not on watching for enemies in the outer system. 3 Ascendi ships died in the first minute of combat. 5 more fell in the next 2 minutes. The remaining ships tried to retreat, calling desperately for reinforcements. But the nearest Ascendi fleet was 3 days away. The slaves would have time to consolidate their gains. Colonel Amy Stevens led her teams down to the planet in assault shuttles. They landed at the largest rebel-held complex and met with the slave leaders. Kevin Ross was among them, his clothes torn and bloody but his spirit unbroken. He shook hands with Amy and actually laughed. "I did not think I would live to see this day," Kevin said. "The day is not over yet," Amy replied. "We need to help you organize. The Ascendi will send everything they have to crush this rebellion. You need to be ready." Over the next 3 days, the Vengeance and its crew worked with the freed slaves to fortify positions and organize defenses. Jake Morrison taught them how to use captured Ascendi weapons. Amy Stevens trained volunteer fighters in basic combat tactics. Lisa Bennett helped them establish secure communication networks. News of the Vega 9 uprising spread across the Empire. On other slave worlds, populations learned that resistance was possible. More rebellions started. Some failed quickly, but some succeeded. The empire that had been stable for 300 years was fracturing into dozens of conflict zones. On Celestian, High Chancellor Zura Khan watched his empire burn. Reports came in constantly. Another world in rebellion, another factory destroyed, another garrison overwhelmed. The carefully maintained order was collapsing faster than anyone had predicted. The subject species had been waiting for this moment for generations. Once they saw it was possible to fight back, nothing could stop them. The Divine Council met in emergency session. Several members argued for immediately deploying the 1,000-ship fleet to crush the rebellions one world at a time. But Zurakan knew that would not work. There were too many rebellions in too many places. If they divided the fleet, the humans would destroy it piece by piece. If they kept the fleet together, the rebellions would spread unchecked. "We must strike at the source," Zurakan said. "The humans started this. If we destroy Earth, we cut off the head of the resistance. The slave species will see that defying us leads only to death." The council agreed. The fleet would go to Earth immediately. They would make an example of humanity so terrible that every species in the galaxy would remember it for 1,000 years. The Ascendi would lose some territory in the short term, but they would win through terror in the long term. On Earth, Admiral Helen Price received the intelligence about the incoming fleet. 1,000 Ascendi ships were on their way. They would arrive in 12 days. Humanity had 20 functional warships, a few dozen armed civilian vessels, and planetary defenses that had never been tested against a real assault. The odds were impossible, But humanity also had something new. The 3 captured Ascendi ships had been studied extensively. Human engineers now understood how to build energy shields. They could not produce them in large numbers quickly, but they could build them. Admiral Price ordered every available resource devoted to shield production. If they could equip even a few more ships with proper defenses, it might make a difference. The Vengeance jumped back to Earth after spending a week in the Vega 9 system. The rebellions there were established and growing stronger. Kevin Ross stayed behind to help coordinate resistance efforts. When Daniel Harper said goodbye, the scientist smiled and said something that stuck in Daniel's mind. "You started something that cannot be stopped now. Even if Earth falls, even if we all die, the idea will survive. The idea that no one has to be a slave. The idea that claimed divinity means nothing against determined resistance. That idea will outlive the Ascendi Empire." Back on Earth, Daniel met with Admiral Price and the other ship commanders. They reviewed the defensive plans for the 100th time. The human fleet would make it stand in orbit around Earth. They would use the planet's gravity well and the moon's position to create choke points. They would fight with every weapon and every trick they had learned. "We cannot win this through conventional combat," Price said to the assembled officers. "We are too outnumbered. But we do not need to win. We just need to survive long enough for the Empire to collapse from within. The rebellions are spreading. The Ascendi are losing control. If we can hold them off for a few weeks, their fleet might be recalled to deal with more urgent threats." It was a desperate hope, but it was all they had. The officers returned to their ships to prepare. Weapons were loaded. Shields were tested. Crews said quiet goodbyes to loved ones on the planet below. Everyone knew that many of them would not survive the coming battle. On the day the Ascendi fleet arrived, every human capable of fighting was at their station. The 1,000 golden ships dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the solar system. They formed into a massive formation that stretched across millions of kilometers.